Yo, what's going on guys? Today I'm going to teach you how to deploy a Next.js app to not Vercel, but your own VPS server. So in this video, you're going to learn a couple of different cool things. Firstly, I'm going to teach you how to set up your own custom server. We're going to be using a VPS by Hostinja to do so. Then I'm going to teach you how to SSH into your external server. We're then going to go ahead and set up something called a remote proxy using NGINX inside of our remote server, which will be running the Ubuntu operating system. I'm then going to show you a couple of bonus tricks, such as how to use VS Code when dealing with external files on a remote server. And I'm going to teach you all about port forwarding, so that way you can run your local host from your remote server on your local machine. Now I get this question all the time. Sunny, can you only deploy a Next.js app using Vercel? No, the reason why you might want to deploy to Vercel is because you get benefits out of the box. But this tutorial is going to teach you how to move away from the Vercel environment and actually deploy your Next.js app to your own custom managed server. First things first, we need a virtual private server. Now you can use a physical server, however in this case a VPS gives us the convenience of being able to access it remotely wherever we are in the world. Now our friends over at Hostinja have set us up with a very sweet deal. All you need to do is follow me. We need to go to hostinja.com/sunny, go ahead and click on the hosting and VPS hosting. Simply go ahead, click choose your plan. In this case we've actually gone ahead with the KVM2, add to cart, scroll down to the bottom, simply pop in code sunny and you'll get an extra 10% off sale price. So after you finish the checkout, you'll go ahead and have to set up your VPS. I've made this so easy for you. The first link in the description actually includes an entire document that looks something like this. So on this document, you're going to have all the steps on how to set up your VPS, as well as every single different terminal command and step that we're going to be doing today. I've also gone ahead and actually helped you out by even breaking down every single terminal command with a nice little explanation as to what every single part of that command does. I know this will help a lot of you out, as it can get very confusing when we start using the terminal. Follow those instructions, get your VPS set up, and then meet me over at the dashboard. So now we're at our dashboard panel. So once you've logged into the H panel, you will see this when you click on the VPS tab over here. Now once you're here, we have a few important points. So the first step is we're going to go ahead and click on copy IP address. This is going to be the address that we're going to go ahead and use to connect to our server anywhere in the world across via the internet. Then we're going to click on SSH access. Now this is how we connect to it from a terminal. You want to click that, and then you see here you have the username and the SSH password. I want you to click on change, and I want you to set a secure password here. Now this password is very important, and you would have set it up as well during the first setup process. As I mentioned, all of these steps are available in the document. The first link is in the description. Okay, so once you've done that, you should have a successful root password. Now the second step is you can either use your regular terminals like so, or in fact you can go ahead and check out the warp.dev website. Now this warp terminal is actually awesome. We are not affiliated with them in any way. However, I do recommend them because it's actually a great tool for using AI to assist you, especially when you're getting nitty and gritty with different terminal commands, such as going into an external server. It helped me out a lot, and I think it will help you out too. So the first step, once your terminal is open, I want you to SSH and then go ahead and put the username, which is root in our case, and at the IP address. Okay, so as you mentioned before, you can get the IP address here. We're going to go ahead and make this full screen to make it a bit easier for you to understand. We're going to go ahead and hit enter. Now here it's going to ask you to add it to a list of known hosts. All I want you to do is type in yes and hit enter, and it will add it to a list of your known hosts on your machine. Now once you've done that, I simply need you to use that root password that we spoke about earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it in and click enter. Hit enter like so. And then you will see starting shell. If for whatever reason you got password denied, I just recommend you simply go to SSH access, change your password, give it a while to go ahead and propagate the changes, and then retry the previous step. Okay, now that we're done with that, you can refer to the steps, as I mentioned before, first link in the description, and you'll see all of the different steps that we're going to have to do. For example, this was the first step. You'll see a nice little explanation about it and so forth. So the first step is we're going to actually go ahead and purge anything related to the Apache HTTP server. This is because we're going to use something called NGINX to handle all of the requests. And we'll explain that in just a second after we finish these steps. So firstly, I want you to run the following command: sudo apt-get purge apache2. Right, with asterisks. Hit enter and go ahead and wait for that to do its magic. If you get prompted, simply pop in enter to go ahead and approve. Once that's done, we're actually going to go ahead and download Node onto our machine, and we're going to rename the output file to the file of our own choice. So in this case, I can go ahead and pop in the following command, kel sl, and we're going to go ahead and download this file, and we're changing the output file to nodesource_setup.sh. So if we go ahead and do this, all it does is it downloads and it puts it into that file. Okay. So now if I press ls, you should see all of the files listed out. So here you can see node source setup.sh. Now I need to run that. I want to run it as an admin. Okay. So what we can do is we can type in sudo bash, and then we simply pop in the script that we want to run. This runs it with elevated privileges. So it allows it to do things like more reads and writes. So let's go ahead and hit enter. Now you might see this message if you're installing. You will have to wait 60 seconds. This is because the script that we're referring to when we install Node is using a deprecated package. They should get this updated fairly shortly, but if not, don't worry, just wait 60 seconds to pass and it will be fine. Once that's done, we're going to update all of the dependencies and package lists using the following command. So you simply need to go ahead and pop in sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade -y. Y is just simply going to make sure that when it prompts us if we want to continue with installing the dependencies, it automatically will approve that step. We're going to simply hit enter, and this will go ahead and update all of our dependencies, similar to how we use npm, except this is for the Ubuntu packages inside of our system. If you see this screen at any time pop up, simply go ahead and pop in escape. So once that's done, all of our packages are up to date, and we can go ahead and set up our remote proxy. Now, let me quickly explain what a remote proxy is and why NGINX is going to allow us to do what we need to do. So when we have a web server, we can think of things in a very simple, high-level way. So let's assume we have a user on this side, okay? So here we have our user. This is in the internet space, right? So this could be anywhere in the world right now where this user is. So let's just assume on the left-hand side, we have the internet. And then let's imagine on the right-hand side, we have our server. So over on here, we have our own VPS, okay? Whenever we typically visit a website, we make a request to an IP address. It simply is where that server exists and where we're gonna go ahead and execute or run the file. Now, the end goal here is when we go to that IP address, so this server will have an IP address of something like 62.85.xx.xx, and these could be whatever characters, right? It doesn't have to start with this either, okay? So this is gonna be your IP address for the server. When we make a request to this, or the domain name, so it could be www.sunny.com, whatever maps to that IP address, we want to go ahead and actually load up our Next.js app. But how do we do that? Because when we tend to run a Next.js app, it runs on something like a local host. How can we basically redirect all of the requests which come to our IP address over to something like a local host, which is running on our server? So when we make a request, we're going to introduce something called a remote proxy, and that's going to be done via NGINX. A remote proxy is a very simple process. And again, this is a very high level explanation just to help you understand. And most of the time it's used to handle things like load balancers and so forth. But in this case, we're going to do a very simple use case. Now imagine when a user's request comes in, it hits this NGINX remote proxy. Now this remote proxy simply will say, if we have a request to, for example, the home root, so our IP address /, then we should redirect all of these requests to the local host. So essentially, we're just bouncing all of these requests over to the local host. Okay. In this way, what we're doing is we're managing all of the requests that come to the server and directing them to where they need to go. Okay. It sounds very confusing, but you can actually go ahead and set this up fairly easy. And then we're going to have our local host running our Next.js app inside. Now, what this does really nicely is it hides away the complexity of your server. So you can have your Next.js app running on your local host on the server, but to a user outside on the internet, they're simply visiting the IP address, seeing the IP address load, and it will go ahead and load up the app as if it's perfectly how we intended. So let's go ahead and see this in action. The first thing we need to do is add in something called a Next.js config file. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pop in the following. Now, this gives us admin privileges. Nano is a way of editing text on a Linux machine. And then we're going to go to the following destination. Okay, and we're going to name the file Next.js config. And I'm simply going to pop in enter. This will give us a nice little editor. You can use this or Vim. I prefer Nano. And then what we're going to do is simply pop in the following snippet. Now, again, it's worth mentioning that all of these steps are available in that documentation I've shown you, and we explain every single step in detail in that document as well. So you can be sure to go ahead and check that out if you get stuck at any point. Now, here, what we're doing is we're setting up a configuration for our server. all it's doing is it's listing on the default port, which is 80. And we need to go ahead and pop out the server IP address here for our server IP address. So all I need you to do is use the arrow keys, head over to where it says server IP, remove this value and pop in your IP address like so. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add in a redirect route. Okay, so in this case, when we hit this IP address at the index, so just the / route, we're going to do something called a proxy pass. And this is essentially what I showed you previously. So when we hit this route, we're essentially saying, okay, if you come to this IP address and you hit the / route, it will go to localhost. But think about what you could really do here. You could set it up to say, if you were at the / contact page, then go to this app. If you're at the / help page, go to another app or a different port running the app, okay, and so forth. But in this case, we're going to keep things very simple. On the home index for this IP address, we're going to redirect to localhost 3000 like so. The rest of it is simply some other attributes which we need to include, okay, but the main one to take care of is this right here. So now that we've done that, we just need to go ahead and do Control X, and then I'm going to type in yes, so Y to go ahead and continue, and then hit enter to save the file. And just like that, we've gone ahead and created our Next.js configuration file for NGINX. It's worth mentioning that this file that we just created is not actually included in the primary NGINX configuration file, which means that it's going to be ignored. Okay, so how do we include it into a file or a directory where it's going to be included into the primary NGINX file? And I can show you this to make sense of this very clearly. So by simply typing in sudo nano etc. NGINX config, you'll get to actually see the primary NGINX file. Now this one, I don't recommend you change it unless you know what you're doing, but I'm trying to prove a point here. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see it includes everything inside of sites enabled / config. Okay, so what we're going to do now is essentially create a connection between this sites available to that folder that I just showed you. So it's very simple to do this. And we use something called a symbolic link to do so. So all you need to do is pop in the following command. Now, notice how the first command is actually the sites available. This is the file that we just created, which done all of the redirecting rules that we want to localhost 3000. And then what we're doing is we're essentially making a pointer available at this address. So think of it this way. We've got the file actually existing at this location that we wrote it to, but we need it to exist in this address. So that way it's included in the primary configuration file that I showed earlier, because this folder directory is actually included. Okay. Now, all we need to do is create a pointer, so a symbolic link. So if I go ahead and hit enter now, what this actually did was it created a pointer inside of sites enabled. And we can simply demonstrate this by typing in ls sites enabled. And you can see now that the Next.js config from this file is a pointer to that directory. So it means that it's essentially the same as that file being there, except it doesn't actually contain any value inside that. It's simply a reference to the other directory, okay? But it works in the exact same way, and it actually gets included now inside of the primary NGINX configuration file, which means that it's actually listened to. And there's a reason why we do this, because if we want to simply disable that site or remove that site from being available, all we now need to do is remove it from here, and then that way it's no longer picked up in the main configuration file and the rule will be ignored. So that way you can very easily enable and disable sites in a way that is very easy. So it's always good to follow some kind of format. So we have our sites available folder and then the enabled sites, which is actually picked up by our main configuration file. Now, the next step is you see this default configuration file. We're actually going to remove that completely because we want to redefine all of the rules for redirecting. So I want you to pop in the following command, rm / etc. NGINX sites enabled default config, and hit enter. And then to test that it was actually successfully removed, we can log out all of the files at that location, and we should now see only the Next.js configuration file. You can see the difference between this area and this area is that now the default config has been completely removed, which means it will only be taking into account the rules that we've provided. Once you've done that, we need to restart the NGINX server because we've changed our configuration file, like so. Now the fun part, we actually create our Next.js app. Our NGINX rules have been set up and everything should be working in the way that we expect. So let's go forward and actually set up our Next.js app. So first things first, I want to create a directory where I'm going to put my Next.js app. We're going to do this by running the make directory file, and we're going to pass it in the following. And this is just a simple example location of where I'm putting the Next.js file. You can simply put it wherever you want, or you can follow what I'm doing. Then we're going to go ahead and cd into that directory. So in this case, if I cd into the directory, you can see now I am at that location. So if I type in ls, it should be an empty folder. So we should see no files inside. At this point, you can optionally log into GitHub. I've included those steps in the separate documentation I showed you earlier. You can simply go ahead and check that out if you want to do that yourself. But in this case, we're not going to actually leverage GitHub because we're going to be creating a fresh Next app using create next app. But before we do that, we're just going to update our node version to make sure that we're at the latest version. Now to do that very simply, I've paired together 3 different commands. We're going to do apt install npm. Then we're going to run npm install global n. This is essentially a node version manager. And we're going to install it globally, which means it's available throughout the entire Linux system. And then we're simply going to run n latest to install the latest version. Let's go ahead and enter to install and do the following. It will prompt you. So you're going to click on Y and hit enter as well. And then let it do its thing while it installs npm, then uses npm to install the global n package and then update node to the latest version. Once you've done that, you should see this message right here. So in this case, node version 20.6.1 has been installed. That's perfect. We can hit Command K to go ahead and clear our terminal to proceed to the next step. Now, all we need to do is initialize our brand new Next.js app. So I'm going to go ahead and use the following command, npx create next app. So we're going to use @latest to make sure we're using the most up-to-date version of our initializer. Then we're going to name it. So in this case, I'm just going to call it my new app. And we're going to hit enter. And then you can go ahead and follow the setup instructions. So we're going to proceed and I'm going to keep everything the current default. So yes, 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 and so forth. So simply go ahead and follow the setup process. And this will go ahead and install my new app inside of that directory. Once that's done, we just need to cd into our new app. So we're going to go ahead and cd into that directory, hit enter. And before we run npm run dev, if you're in the same terminal, since we did all of those different node version changes, I highly recommend you run the following, #-r. What this does is it goes ahead and actually invalidates the current location hash. Basically, it's the same as opening a new terminal, and sometimes what this does is it fixes small bugs that can occur, especially when we change node versions, okay? So this will actually go ahead and essentially give us a fresh state, so that way we can run our npm packages. So now that we're at this point, we're going to type in npm run dev. Now, what this will do is it will spin our app up on localhost 3000. Now, you might be tempted to run and just go ahead and click that. But if you do that, it's not going to run the way you expect, because this is not localhost 3000 on your current machine. This is localhost 3000 on your external machine. So the way that you can test this is in Warp, you can open up a second terminal by hitting Command D, so we can split the terminal. And I'm going to show you a quick little trick as to how you can actually test that the request is working in the way that we expect. So what we need to do is on this new terminal, we're going to SSH into our terminal. So we're going to go ahead and access it. Then you'll be prompted to go ahead and pass in your password. So I'm going to go ahead and pop in the password when it's requested. So pop in the password, hit enter, and then it will start the shell up. Now, what you can do here to go ahead and make a request to our local host over on this side, once we're inside of our external server, is we can type in curl, and then we can type in http://localhost 3000, okay, like so. And then you can go ahead and hit enter. Now, what you should see is a request was made, okay? Now, it'll take a little bit of time because it's developing it and it's running it for the first time, but you can actually see now that this is the output. Basically, this is the HTML code, and we can see that is correct because we can actually see some tailwind inside of the code. So we know that it's running, and that's essentially how you visit localhost 3000 through the terminal to make sure that it's working. So little test, and it works very well. We can go ahead and hit Command W to close that. Now, what we should actually also be able to see is that because we set up our NGINX rules previously, now those redirect requests that I spoke about earlier should be running as we've set up our NGINX correctly. So let's actually go ahead and visit our IP address and see if the expected behavior outcomes. So let's go over to our browser, and I want you to pop in the IP address of your website. So I actually have my IP address here. I'm going to hit enter. And as you can see, it's working. This is perfect. And to prove this is running, if I was to actually go ahead and cut the server by doing Control C, now you can see it will still try to redirect the request, but when I refresh the page, you can see a bad gateway. That's because it tried to redirect to the local host in this fashion, but localhost wasn't running. So it simply got a 502 and it failed. Okay. Now in a real production environment, we don't want to do npm run dev because this will have a lot of extra dependencies for the dev environment. Instead, what we simply do is we say npm run build, and then we would run npm start once we build out the optimized production build. So let's go ahead and skip to that step right now. So once the page is built up, we're going to type in npm run start, and this will go ahead and start the app on localhost 3000, but now it's a production build. Okay, so this is exactly what we would want. Then we can click on refresh and we should see the app. But notice how it's a lot faster. That's because we've stripped out all the unnecessary dependencies. We've created a production build and it's going to go ahead and get rendered on the screen like so. But we need this always running. Now, this is a problem and it's not ideal because if you were to leave your computer at any time, your external server would stop running the Next.js app and then you would see again a 502. So how can we have a process running that is always going ahead and running our website or our Next.js app on our external server, and let's say it crashed or for whatever reason stopped, rebooted itself so that way it's always up? Because that's what we want, our Next.js app to always stay up on our external service. That way users can always visit it and see what's going on. Well, we can use something called PM2, which is a process manager on Linux. So to use PM2, all we have to do is cut our server, and we're actually going to go ahead and install it right now. So the first step I want you to do is go ahead and type in sudo npm install -g, because we're going to install it globally across our Ubuntu system. And then we're going to type in PM2. So this will go ahead and install PM2 to our system, which, as I mentioned before, is a process manager. Now, notice how the previous step that we did was actually running npm run start after we had, of course, done our build step. But this is where I need to provide that instruction to PM2 so that it can run that process on its own. Okay. So I'm going to break down the following. What we want to do is use the following command. We're going to say PM2 start, and then we're going to give it a process. So in this case, we're basically telling it to do the npm run start. And what we're going to do is we're going to say npm, we're going to give it a name, and we're going to give the name of this process just Next.js. But you could call this your test app. You can call it whatever you really want. That's just going to be what's shown on PM2 whenever you check the status. And then we're going to pass it the command. It's actually going to go ahead and run itself. Now, again, as I mentioned before, if you want to go ahead and see a nice breakdown of this, you can do so in the documentation, and you'll see a nice little breakdown of every single command inside of the helpful documentation. Again, first link in the description. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit enter. And what this will do is it will start up PM2 and it will go ahead and make our app run. Okay, so again, if I typed in PM2 status now, we should see that the Next.js app has been allocated some memory and it's online. Now the next step is we need to make sure that PM2 starts up on boot. So to do this, we simply run PM2 startup. This means that whenever the system boots up, it will also start up, and that way it will make sure that our Next.js app is actually running at the same time. And then we need to save this entire PM2 configuration. So as you can see here, it says freeze a process list on reboot. So we're going to go ahead and copy that and pop in that command as well. And that is it. That's perfectly done. And now our app is running in the way that we expected. So if I was to go over here, you can see that if I clear my terminal, I'm not actually running the app on the right-hand side. Instead, PM2 is running it in the background. And as I mentioned, if it cuts off for whatever reason, it will restart. If I go over here and I create a new tab, so I just want to prove a point here, and I'm going to try and access the IP address. Now, what you can see is the Next.js app is running perfectly. This is because our process manager, PM2, is actually running the app in the background. If I can prove this by typing in PM2 status, and as you can see, it's running it in the background. Okay, so everything's perfectly working. And as you can see, we have consistent uptime. Now you might notice how there is no SSL certificate. That is another step. We're not going to cover that in this video, but if you would like that, let me know down in the comments if you want to see me create a tutorial on that. But there's lots of helpful documentation on Hostinja and also online to be able to add in a SSL certificate. And there you have it, guys. You've just deployed your first Next.js app on your own VPS, your virtual private server. And this time you've done it on Hostinja. Okay. So this is a great thing to do on your portfolio to showcase a lot of different skills, but we're not done there. I've got a bonus section for you, and I'm going to show you what if you wanted to go ahead and modify this site now. And you can actually use your favorite IDE such as VS Code to do so. So let's jump straight into this section. So to get started, all you need to do is open up VS Code. Now in this case, I'm on a coaching call project. So this is actually a coaching call which I run inside of Zero to Full Stack Hero, our flagship course and community. If you're interested in joining and you want to learn how to master your coding skills, check it out. It will be the second link in the description. So what I need you to do is actually go ahead and install the following extension. I want you to go over to the extensions tab and type in remote. Now, the first one you'll see is remote SSH. Now, I've installed the pre-release version. However, you can go ahead and switch to the release version. So install this, and this is going to allow us to SSH, like we did earlier, into our server, but instead this time through VS Code. Once you've done that, you want to go ahead and type in Command-Shift-P. Now, once you've done this, you're going to say remote SSH connect to host. Now, Command-Shift-P is like a command runner. It allows us to run a lot of our extensions or anything programmatically inside of VS Code that we need to. So you want to go to the connect to host, hit enter. So in this case, I just need you to simply pop in root at the IP address like we did earlier. But in this case, I've already done that. And then it will ask you again, similar to earlier, would you like to add it to a list of known hosts? But I'm just simply going to hit enter in this case because I've already done this step. Once you've done that correctly, you'll be prompted to enter in your password. So I'm going to simply pop in my password and hit enter. Now, this is the magical part. So it's essentially doing the same thing that we did earlier on the terminal, but for our VS Code setup. And what you'll see is it actually will install VS Code into our Linux server and allow us to do all the things that I'm going to show you in just a second. You'll see that we get a brand new window with everything that we need. So we're going to click on the Explorer and we're going to click on Open Folder or Command O. So as you can see, we're actually inside of our external server now. So if I was to go over here to our root directory and I went to /var/www./Next.js, we should be able to see our test app load. So you can see this, my new app, perfect. So if I was to go ahead and do this and simply click on OK, now here's the beautiful part. It opens up our VS Code and it will sometimes prompt us again for the password. So all you need to do again is pop in the password, but it will set everything up in the perfect way as if we were coding inside of our own local environment. So now if I go over to our directory, we should see all of our Next.js coding files, and then we should be able to edit all of those files inside as if we set up on our own computer. So now you can see I can go ahead and edit all of the code from the remote external server. This is incredibly powerful, guys. Do not underestimate this because this essentially allows you to modify code on an external server whilst still using VS Code. There's only one missing part of the puzzle. What if I want to run this code? So notice how our terminal is already SSH'd into the terminal. So again, this is not going to be root. This is going to be a regular Mac terminal. So I'm going to type in npm run dev, and I want to prove a point here now. So if I do npm run dev, the first thing we'll notice is, okay, firstly, port 3001 is already busy. That's fine. In this case, that's because we're running port 3000 for PM2. So we can leave it on 3001, but how do I run 3001 for now? We're going to do something called port forwarding. So I want you to go over to ports and you want to click on forward a port. And we're simply going to forward the port 3001. And as you can see, its forwarded address is 3001 over here. So we're going to click on this web over here. And then what this does is it forwards the port from our local host on our external server to our machine localhost. And in fact, you can even click on this button right here and the following will pop up. So now you can see that we're actually forwarding our port 3001 to our local machine and we get our output, which is perfect. So there you have it, guys. You deployed your first ever Next.js app to a VPS server. And I even included a bonus section, which was how to go ahead and edit the code from your external server. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you have, don't forget to subscribe. A lot of you are watching right now and don't actually subscribe. It's crazy. And don't forget to like and comment down below if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more just like this. If you want to go ahead and make use of the VPS that we use today, then it's worthwhile checking out our sponsors of today's video, Hostinja. A couple of reasons why I would recommend Hostinja. Not only are their servers extremely fast, just like we saw today, but they have a 99.9% uptime guarantee. They have a really easy to navigate H panel and it's really user-friendly, just like you saw today. And if you ever get stuck, they have 365 days support all year round to go ahead and help you conquer the things you're tackling. And there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, if you want to leverage all of these things, then feel free to use code SUNNY at checkout for 10% off of any of the packages. It also helps out the PAPAFAM, so your boy appreciates it. As always, guys, it's your boy Sunny. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next video. Peace. Why not check out my entire Next.js crash course over here, especially if you're a beginner, 6 builds in 18 hours. Very little video. I'll click this right now. Go check it out. Peace.